On the night of January 21st, 1957, a man did his end-of-day routine. He brushed his teeth, he said goodnight to his older sisters, he put on his pajamas, and he got ready for bed. But shortly before midnight, there was a knock at the door. And so this guy gets out of his bed, he opens the front door, and there he finds a handful of New York City police officers. To the women in the house, they didn't really know what was going on or why these men were so far outside of their jurisdiction. But the man says to the officers, "I know why you fellas are here." He led them to the garage, and they could not believe what they were looking at. Finally, after 16 years, their manhunt was finally over. Just a reminder that if you like learning about all of the stories that make New York City what it is today, then you've come to the right place. On this channel, I cover crime stories, history, architecture, big-name people. So, if you want to learn more, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Now, let's get into today's story. On November 16, 1940, employees of the Consolidated Edison Power Plant, or Con Ed for short, arrived for their morning shifts. Con Ed is this massive energy company that provides gas, electric, and steam service in New York City and Westchester County. The power plant was located at 170 West 64th Street, which is about a block away from what we now call Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center didn't exist yet at the time. Now, as one employee was set to begin his lunch hour, he saw something on the window ledge that he had never noticed before. It hadn't been there the day before, or any other day for that matter. So this employee decided to get a closer look, and when he did, he immediately started to panic. That thing on the window ledge was a wooden box, but inside the wooden box was a pipe bomb. It was this short length of brass pipe, and it was filled with gunpowder. There was also an ignition mechanism made of sugar and flashlight batteries. The police were called in, and they acted quickly enough where they were able to disarm this bomb before it ever exploded. However, the police came to the conclusion that it was probably never going to go off in the first place. And the reason they thought that was because there was a note attached to the bomb. And if that bomb had actually gone off, nobody would have ever found that note. It would have been blown up. The note said, "Con Edison crooks, this is for you." And it was signed with the letters FP. A small investigation was launched, but nothing really ever came of it. There wasn't much evidence to go off of. There were no eyewitnesses to anyone leaving a bomb. The initials meant nothing to anybody. The company is part of everyone's lives, so anyone in New York could have a potential motive in this case. The police tried and tried again, but nothing was turning up. And it wasn't before long that 10 months had gone by with no break in the case. However, in September of 1941, that changed. Con Edison's headquarters can be found just a few blocks from Union Square, even to this day. The building is located at 4 Irving Plaza. And in September 1941, the same kind of ignition mechanism for the first bomb was found only a few blocks away from these headquarters. Once again, the police were called about it, and just like the first time, this bomb was a dud. It didn't go off. However, this time there was no note, so the police were under the impression that this one was supposed to go off and something went wrong. Perhaps it didn't reach its destination. It couldn't be a coincidence that this mechanism was found just a few blocks away from yet another Con Edison location. The police restarted their investigation, but just like last time, they were coming up with no answers. And a few months later, after the United States entered World War II, they received a new note from the bomber. It said, "I will make no more bomb units for the duration of the war. My patriotic feelings have made me decide this. Later, I will bring the Con Edison to justice. They will pay for their dastardly deeds. FP." For the next decade, this bomb maker did just that. Nothing. He didn't plant any bombs anywhere. Was it possible that he was serving in the war? Was it possible that he was no longer alive? I mean, anything could be considered a possibility here, right? Eventually, it seemed like nobody remembered these bombs ever existed. After all, these bombs had never even gone off. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was going to remember. But in 1951, FP was back at it, and he planted a bomb in one of the busiest parts of Manhattan, Grand Central Terminal. Grand Central Terminal was one of 2 major train stations in 1951, the other being Penn Station. It doesn't really matter what hour of the day it is, even if it's the late hours of the night, you're always going to find a number of people walking through this station. But on March 29th, in the middle of the day, commuters were just going about their afternoon, walking through the main and lower concourses, and between those concourses is this very popular eatery called the Grand Central Oyster Bar and Restaurant. and FP left behind a bomb in an urn right next to this restaurant, and this one went off. The explosion was minor, so minor in fact that nobody was injured, but immediately after this explosion, a phone rang in the restaurant, and a man with a foreign accent spoke on the other end of the line asking, "Was there much damage?" It seemed like this menacing man was getting a kick out of what he was doing, and for the next few years, he continued to terrorize the city. He planted bombs in some of the most iconic landmarks in New York: Radio City Music Hall, the New York Public Library, Penn Station, Rockefeller Center, the subways, the Port Authority bus terminal. I mean, all these years later, we know that he planted at least 33 bombs, 22 of which exploded and injured 15 people, although luckily, nobody was ever killed. However, the police didn't know if that was ever going to change. These were bombs. Of course one could kill somebody someday. They needed to find this guy before it was too late, and he was taunting the police through the newspapers. He would send open letters to the New York Herald Tribune, and they'd be written with these big penciled block letters, and they'd almost always come back to the idea that he had been wronged by Con Edison and he was going to make them pay. The scariest part about this madman was it could be anybody. Take a look out the window and see someone opening their car. Could be that person. A person walking their dog. Could be them too. People were afraid to go out to restaurants. People were afraid to ride the subways. People were afraid to be in any popular places. One thing the Mad Bomber liked to do was go to the movies, and then when the lights went down, he would take out a little penknife and cut into the seat next to him and place a bomb inside the seat. And then he would leave the theater. A few minutes later, he would detonate the bomb. So clearly something had to change. The police were failing miserably in this case, and it was only a matter of time before significant damage or blood was on their hands. This manhunt had been going on for 16 years. The police had met with handwriting experts, fingerprint experts, a bomb investigation unit. They all came up with nothing. There were also false leads coming from what felt like a million different places. People were turning in anyone they knew who knew too much about bombs or had been acting strangely lately. The only real working theories that the police had come up with was FP was probably an ex-employee of Con Edison who probably had a grudge against the company. The bomber was also likely a skilled mechanic with access to a drill press or a lathe, which are these big machine tools used in wood turning, metalworking, metal spinning, things like that. The person's mail was also posted from White Plains, New York, which is about 30 miles north from where the first bomb was found. That's it. That's all of the information that they had. That's what they were working with. Where are you supposed to go from there? They were checking lawsuit records, mental hospital admissions, vocational schools where they might make parts that can be used to build a bomb. But eventually, they needed to get creative. They were out of physical evidence. But what if they could manipulate this physical evidence to learn more about who the Mad Bomber actually was? For the first time in police history, they turned to a psychiatrist. On a cold December morning, Captain Finney of the New York Police Department left the police headquarters with 2 bomb squad sidekicks, and he drove to the offices of one Dr. James Russell. Russell was a psychiatrist with expertise in the workings of the criminal mind. He had never worked on a case before, but studied the criminal mind after cases had been completed. But he was also working for the New York Department of Mental Hygiene, which had over 120,000 patients. He had this massive stack of files on his desk when they arrived. It wasn't like he could just push those files aside to help these officers solve this case, because after all, they'd come up with nothing in over 15 years of searching for this guy. They'd met with a great number of experts. Why should he be any different? The reality was that this was a big swing. In 1956, something like this had never been tried before, but they were clearly desperate. And on top of that, this is one of the highest profile cases ever in the city's history. Russell couldn't ignore that. The police sought him out because of his reputation. He had published psychoanalyses of Van Gogh, Dickens, Tchaikovsky, Mary Todd Lincoln. Clues came to him quickly enough that he was able to write his own crossword puzzles. He was a very intelligent man. So it took just a little bit of convincing, but he asked to see what they had. You see, the job of a psychiatrist is to look at a person, get to know them, and almost predict how they might react to difficult situations, like being fired, going through a breakup, losing a family member. But what if instead of trying to predict behavior based on personality, the psychiatrist could predict personality based on behavior? Could he work backwards? This theory was the birth of what we now call criminal profiling. So Captain Finney dumped a satchel full of evidence on Russell's desk, There were photographs of unexploded bombs and mystery letters that were sent by FP, but in reality, that's all the police had. That's all that Russell was given to work with. But Russell studied it all anyway, hoping to be able to find something, some sort of clues, and within a few hours, he did come up with some ideas. He wasn't going to say that these ideas were 100% accurate, but he also believed that what he was about to say was probably not far off from the truth. So the first thing that Russell noticed was this man was a textbook paranoid schizophrenic. These grudges that the man was holding on to were much larger in his own eyes than they were in the eyes of Con Edison. In fact, Con Edison probably had no idea they'd done anything wrong. Russell went on to say that we all get mad at other people in other organizations sometimes, but with most of us the anger goes away. When you're paranoid, it doesn't. If the bomber thinks that Con Ed wronged him, then it's probably going to remain in his mind. And because most paranoids don't develop full symptoms until the age of 35, the bomber could have been roughly that age at the time that he planted the first bomb. So odds are, 16 years later, he's in his early 50s. Russell continued that paranoids usually have a certain body type, so just by playing the odds, said the bomber was probably somewhere in the symmetrical build category. Not skinny, not fat, but proportionate, like an athletic build. Then based on the block letters that he had written by hand, free of smudge marks, this was a man who was very proper. He was always at work on time. He dresses nicely. His bedroom is nicely kept. He had lived a model life up until whatever this injustice was. Russell also noted that the bomber likely had an Oedipus complex. Now, this complex is indeed a little complicated. It begins with the son desiring his mother, but that's not all. It snowballs from there. The son realizes that the mother has affection for his father, and now he must compete for that attention. And once the son is jealous of the father, it's assumed that the reciprocal is true too, that the father is jealous of the son, and then all of this usually just goes away by a pretty early age, like 6 years old. For paranoids, though, it doesn't go away, and the consciousness will change the father figure to an authority figure, which could mean as an adult, this person might hate a boss, or a company, or a politician. And this could help explain why the bomber was placing bombs in places other than Con Ed locations. Con Ed was distributing energy to everywhere. Anywhere a wire runs, anywhere gas goes, that all becomes a target now, like they're all conspiring together against him. An assumption was also made that the bomber came from a Slavic country. These Slavic countries are mostly represented over Middle and Eastern Europe. This contradicted the police's suspicions that he was a German based on how he wrote his letters. But Russell said that because the guy they were looking for used both bombs and knives, two weapons favored in Eastern Europe, he was once again just kind of playing the odds. And he also said that if he were correct, their bomber probably wasn't living in Westchester County. He was living in a suburb of Connecticut, where Slavs typically settled, and he was using Westchester as a halfway point to deliver his mail. The last prediction he made was that when they found him, he'd be wearing a double-breasted suit with the buttons definitely buttoned. He got all of this information from just looking at some photographs for a few hours, and he told the officers that his profile of the bomber should be published in the newspaper as a letter to the bomber, because if this bomber was as paranoid as he thought he was, if he got anything wrong, the bomber would surely reach out to correct him. So they published these notes in the New York Journal-American, which was this daily newspaper that doesn't exist anymore, and they also pleaded the bomber to give himself up and promised him a fair trial. The bomber did indeed write back, and frequently. And every time he did, they'd uncover a little bit more about him. Details soon came out that he had been injured on the job, and he had developed pneumonia, then later tuberculosis, and he even gave the date that he had been injured from his workplace accident, September 5th, 1931. This was a major break in the case. A Con Edison clerk named Alice Kelly had been searching day after day regarding workplace injuries, workers' compensation, and on January 18, 1957, she found a file that used words like injustice and permanently disabled, which were words that had also been used in this open letter to the New York Journal-American sent by the bomber. This file was for an employee named George Metesky, who worked for Con Edison from 1929 to 1931. He was currently living in Waterbury, Connecticut. This was one of a handful of leads given to the NYPD, but it did seem pretty important, so Waterbury police were asked to keep an eye out on the house. After the weekend, the NYPD made their trip up to Connecticut. It was shortly before midnight when they knocked on 53-year-old George Metesky's door. He answered the door in his pajamas, and the police were interested in a handwriting sample. He knew it was happening immediately, though. He told them, "I know why you fellows are here. You think I'm the Mad Bomber. He led them out to his garage where he kept his lathe, pipes, connectors, cheap pocket watches, flashlight batteries. It was all right there on display for them. He was not hiding anything. In fact, he was a little relieved because now Con Edison could be put on blast on trial, and that would surely bring them to justice. When asked what FP meant, he said it just meant fair play. They told him to get dressed so he could come down to the station, and sure enough, he came out wearing this buttoned, double-breasted jacket. The man fit Brussels' profile nearly perfectly. His bedroom was meticulous. He also came from a Lithuanian background, which, yes, is more of a Baltic state than Slavic, but Lithuania is a country with many Slavs living in it. During Metesky's interrogation, he mentioned that he had been gassed in the Con Edison plant after a furnace blast released toxic fumes that he had inhaled, hence the tuberculosis. He admitted to placing 32 different bombs. He was indicted on 47 charges, but only 7 counts of attempted murder were actually charged due to statute of limitations in the case. He underwent psychiatric evaluation and was found to be legally insane and incompetent to stand trial. He was sent to a hospital for the criminally insane, and he miraculously overcame his tuberculosis during his time at the hospital. In fact, he was a model inmate while he was there. Dr. Brussel would occasionally meet with him to continue his studies of the man that was known as the Mad Bomber, and Metesky admitted to him that he had built the bomb specifically so that they would never kill anyone. He wasn't trying to kill anybody. As for Alice Kelly, she refused to accept a reward for finding the file that led to Metesky's arrest, saying that she was only doing her job. An investigation was launched, though, against Con Edison for impeding the investigation. The company had claimed that the records of employees prior to 1940 had been lost. Nothing ever came of that investigation. By 1973, it was determined that George Metesky was not dangerous, and he was released from the hospital under the condition that he make regular visits to a clinic near his home. He'd go on to live out the rest of his days in Waterbury, Connecticut, and he died at the age of 90 in 1994. But he never built another bomb again, and it was this case that gave validation to criminal profiling, something that is often used by the FBI today. So that's going to do it, folks. Remember, my goal here on this channel is to educate you through storytelling. It's a passion of mine. I would be curious to know what stories have actually stuck with you so far from the channel. Why don't you let me know in the comments section down below so I can get an idea of what the audience likes. And speaking of likes, if you haven't done so already, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and that way you won't miss out on any of the future videos. I'll catch you all in the next one. Deuces, kids.